Hello, dear viewer, and thank you for joining me on day 46 of reading the Bible together. Today we are reading Leviticus chapters 2, 3, and 4 from the Old Testament, as well as Matthew chapter 26, verse 6 to 25 from the New Testament. Let's start. Leviticus chapter 2, Grain Offerings. When any of you present an offering of grain to the Lord, you must first grind it into flour. You must put olive oil and incense on it and bring it to the Aaronite priests. The officiating priest shall take a handful of the flour and oil and all of the incense and burn it on the altar as a token that it has all been offered to the Lord. The odor of this food offering is pleasing to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering belongs to the priests. It is very holy, since it is taken from the food offered to the Lord. If the offering is bread baked in an oven, it must be made without yeast. It may be thick loaves made of flour mixed with olive oil, or thin cakes brushed with olive oil. If the offering is bread cooked on a griddle, it is to be made of flour mixed with olive oil but without yeast. Crumble it up and pour the oil on it when you present it as an offering. If the offering is bread cooked in a pan, it is to be made of flour and olive oil. Bring it as an offering to the Lord and present it to the priest, who will take it to the altar. The priest will take part of it as a token that it has all been offered to the Lord, and he will burn it on the altar. The odor of this food offering is pleasing to the Lord. The rest of the offering belongs to the priests. It is very holy, since it is taken from the food offered to the Lord. None of the grain offerings which you present to the Lord may be made with yeast. You must never use yeast or honey in food offered to the Lord. An offering of the first grain that you harvest each year shall be brought to the Lord, but it is not to be burned on the altar. Put salt on every grain offering, because salt represents the covenant between you and God. You must put salt on all your offerings. When you bring to the Lord an offering of the first grain harvested, offer roasted grain or ground meal. Add olive oil and put incense on it. The priest will burn that part of the meal and oil that is to serve as a token, and also all the incense as a food offering to the Lord. Leviticus chapter 3, Fellowship Offerings. When any of you offer one of your cattle as a fellowship offering, it is to be a bull or a cow without any defects. You shall put your hand on the head of the animal and kill it at the entrance of the tent of the Lord's presence. The Aaronite priests shall throw the blood against all four sides of the altar and present the following parts of the animal as a food offering to the Lord: all the fat on the internal organs, the kidneys and the fat on them, and the best part of the liver. The priests shall burn all this on the altar along with the burnt offerings. The odor of this food offering is pleasing to the Lord. If a sheep or goat is used as a fellowship offering, it may be male or female, but it must be without any defects. If you offer a sheep, you shall put your hand on its head and kill it in front of the tent. The priest shall throw its blood against all four sides of the altar and present the following parts of the animal as a food offering to the Lord: the fat, the entire fat tail cut off near the backbone, all the fat covering the internal organs, the kidneys and the fat on them, and the best part of the liver. The officiating priest shall burn all this on the altar as a food offering to the Lord. If you offer a goat, you shall put your hand on its head and kill it in front of the tent. The priests shall throw its blood against all four sides of the altar and present the following parts as a food offering to the Lord: all the fat on the internal organs, the kidneys and the fat on them, and the best part of the liver. The priest shall burn all this on the altar as a food offering pleasing to the Lord. All the fat belongs to the Lord. No Israelite may eat any fat or any blood. This is a rule to be kept forever by all Israelites wherever they live. Leviticus chapter 4, Offerings for Unintentional Sins. the Lord commanded Moses to tell the people of Israel that anyone who sinned and broke any of the Lord's commands without intending to would have to observe the following rules. If it is the high priest who sins and so brings guilt on the people, he shall present a young bull without any defects and sacrifice it to the Lord for his sin. He shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent, put his hand on its head, and kill it there in the Lord's presence. Then the high priest shall take some of the bull's blood and carry it into the tent. He shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it in front of the sacred curtain 7 times. Then he shall put some of the blood on the projections at the corners of the incense altar in the tent. He shall pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar used for burning sacrifices, which is at the entrance of the tent. From this bull he shall take all the fat on the internal organs, the kidneys and the fat on them, and the best part of the liver. The priest shall take this fat and burn it on the altar used for the burnt offerings, just as he does with the fat from the animal killed for the fellowship offering. But he shall take its skin, all its flesh, its head, its legs, and its internal organs, including the intestines, carry it all outside the camp to the ritually clean place where the ashes are poured out, and there he shall burn it on a wood fire. If it is the whole community of Israel that sins and becomes guilty of breaking one of the Lord's commands without intending to, then as soon as the sin becomes known, the community shall bring a young bull as a sin offering. They shall bring it to the tent of the Lord's presence. The leaders of the community shall put their hands on its head, and it shall be killed there. The high priest shall take some of the bull's blood into the tent, dip his finger in it, and sprinkle it in front of the curtain 7 times. He shall put some of the blood on the projections at the corners of the incense altar inside the tent, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar used for burning sacrifices, which is at the entrance of the tent. Then he shall take all its fat and burn it on the altar. He shall do the same thing with this bull as he does with a bull for the sin offering, and in this way he shall make the sacrifice for the people's sin, and they will be forgiven. Then he shall take the bull outside the camp and burn it, just as he burns the bull offered for his own sin. This is an offering to take away the sin of the community. If it is a ruler who sins and becomes guilty of breaking one of the Lord's commands without intending to, then as soon as the sin is called to his attention, he shall bring as his offering a male goat without any defects. He shall put his hand on its head and kill it on the north side of the altar, where the animals for the burnt offerings are killed. This is an offering to take away sin. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood of the animal, put it on the projections at the corners of the altar, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar. Then he shall burn all of its fat on the altar, just as he burns the fat of the animals killed for the fellowship offerings. In this way, the priest shall offer the sacrifices for the sin of the ruler, and he will be forgiven. If any of you people sin and become guilty of breaking one of the Lord's commands without intending to, then as soon as the sin is called to your attention, you shall bring as your offering a female goat without any defects. You shall put your hand on its head and kill it on the north side of the altar, where the animals for the burnt offerings are killed. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood of the animal, put it on the projections at the corners of the altar, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar. Then he shall remove all its fat, just as the fat is removed from the animals killed for the fellowship offerings, and he shall burn it on the altar as an odor pleasing to the Lord. In this way, the priest shall offer the sacrifices for the man's sin, and he will be forgiven. If you bring a sheep as a sin offering, it must be a female without any defects. You shall put your hand on its head and kill it on the north side of the altar, where the animals for the burnt offerings are killed. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood of the animal, put it on the projections at the corners of the altar, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar. Then he shall remove all its fat, just as the fat is removed from the sheep, killed for the fellowship offerings. and he shall burn it on the altar along with the food offerings given to the Lord. In this way the priest shall offer the sacrifice for your sin, and you will be forgiven. Please feel free to pause the video here for time to reflect on what we have read. Let's continue. Matthew chapter 26, verse 6 to 25. Jesus is anointed at Bethany. Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon, a man who had suffered from a dreaded skin disease. While Jesus was eating, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar filled with an expensive perfume, which she poured on his head. The disciples saw this and became angry. "Why all this waste?" they asked. "This perfume could have been sold for a large amount and the money given to the poor." Jesus knew what they were saying, and so he said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? It is a fine and beautiful thing that she has done for me. You will always have poor people with you, but you will not always have me. What she did was to pour this perfume on my body to get me ready for burial. Now I assure you that wherever this gospel is preached all over the world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." Judas agrees to betray Jesus. Then one of the 12 disciples, the one named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What will you give me if I betray Jesus to you?" They counted out 30 silver coins and gave them to him. From then on, Judas was looking for a good chance to hand Jesus over to them. Jesus eats the Passover meal with his disciples. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked him, "Where do you want us to get the Passover meal ready for you?" "Go to a certain man in the city," he said to them, "and tell him, 'The teacher says, my hour has come. My disciples and I will celebrate the Passover at your house.'" The disciples did as Jesus had told them and prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, Jesus and the 12 disciples sat down to eat. During the meal, Jesus said, "I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples were very upset and began to ask him, one after the other, "Surely, Lord, you don't mean me?" Jesus answered, "One who dips his bread in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man will die as the scriptures say he will, but how terrible for that man who will betray the Son of Man. It would have been better for that man if he had never been born." Judas the traitor spoke up. "Surely, teacher, you don't mean me?" he asked. Jesus answered, "So you say." Please feel free to pause the video here for time to reflect on what we have read. That's it for today, and I hope that you'll join me in the next video. Wishing you a graceful morning, day, or evening.